Hey everyone, today we are diving into something that, let's be honest, we all do. We make mistakes, but here's the thing. We're not going to look at error as some kind of personal failure. Instead, we're going to see it for what it is, a totally fundamental, predictable, and actually a really fascinating part of how our brains are wired.
I mean, come on. Of course you have, right? We all have. You walk up to a door, you see that big handle, and your brain just screams, "Pull me," even when the sign says the exact opposite. And you feel a little silly for a second, but it's actually the perfect example of a design flaw. That handle is sending your brain a signal that totally contradicts the written instruction. And that right there is the core idea we're digging into today. A lot of the time, human error is really just a mismatch between our human psychology and the world we've built around ourselves.
You've probably heard this famous quote from Alexander Pope. It really sets the perfect tone for what we're talking about. We're going to explore why we mess up, but not to point fingers or place blame. We're doing it to understand. Because, once you understand why we make mistakes, that's the first real step toward designing systems that actually forgive them. Systems that are built for real, actual humans.
And here's the absolute truth of it. It is impossible to build a system that is 100% immune to human error. I don't care if it's the simplest app on your phone or the most complex nuclear power plant. If a person is involved, mistakes are going to happen. So the goal isn't to somehow create a flawless user, because that's never going to happen, but to create systems that anticipate and accommodate our very human nature.
So what do these mistakes actually look like? Are all errors basically the same? Well, not really. Let's get in there and dissect the anatomy of a mistake to see what's really going on under the hood. The main category we're going to zero in on is something called performance errors. These are those classic slip-ups we make when we're just trying to get something done. Following a recipe, setting up a new phone, trying to navigate a confusing website. And it turns out these errors tend to show up in a few very predictable flavors.
Generally, these performance errors fall into three main buckets. First up, you've got errors of commission. This is when you do too much. You add extra steps that you don't need. Like that Wi-Fi example, you're hunting through menus when all you had to do was tap one button. Then there are errors of omission. This is when you forget a critical step. Happens all the time, right? Like when you're setting up your email, you get the outgoing mail to work perfectly, but you completely forget to configure the incoming server. And finally, you have wrong action errors. This is where you do the right kind of step, but you do it incorrectly, like typing in the wrong password or server name. Just seeing these patterns is a huge step toward designing better products.
Okay, so we've seen how these small, everyday mistakes happen. But how do these little slip-ups sometimes snowball into absolute catastrophes, like we saw at Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island? Well, probably the best way to wrap your head around this is with a really powerful metaphor called the Swiss cheese model.
So I want you to imagine a big stack of Swiss cheese. The psychologist James Reason came up with this idea. He said each slice of cheese is a different layer of defense in a complex system. These layers could be anything from high-level organizational influences to things like unsafe supervision, all the way down to an individual's own unsafe acts. The holes in the cheese, well, those are the weaknesses in each layer. Now, most of the time, an error gets stopped because a solid part of the next slice of cheese blocks it. A disaster only happens when, just by pure terrible luck, all the holes in all the slices momentarily line up, creating a straight path for failure to travel right through the whole system. It shows that huge disasters are almost never caused by just one big mistake.
Now, there is one thing that can make those holes in the cheese a whole lot bigger, and that's stress. Stress has this incredibly powerful and often really surprising effect on our ability to get things done right.
Now here's what's so interesting. Not all stress is actually bad for us. A little bit of pressure can sharpen our focus. It can boost our performance. If a task is kind of boring, a little bit of arousal can wake us up and get us engaged. But, and believe me, this is a huge but, this only works up to a very specific tipping point.
This is what's known as the Yerkes-Dodgson law. If you look at the chart, you can see that at low levels of stress, our performance is usually pretty low. We might be bored, unmotivated. As that arousal or stress increases, our performance climbs and climbs until we hit that perfect sweet spot. That's our peak efficiency. But if you go past that point, any more stress sends our performance absolutely crashing down. We get overwhelmed, we get frazzled, and we become way more likely to make mistakes. And what's really fascinating about this is when we get into that high-stress zone, skills that are normally completely automatic for us suddenly require intense, focused concentration. When the stakes get really high, we start to overthink the very things we could normally do in our sleep. Just think about a professional athlete choking under pressure. The source material gives a perfect example: baseball star Alex Rodriguez.
Back in 2010, he was sitting on 599 career home runs, just one away from this huge, historic milestone. Now, hitting a baseball was a deeply practiced, totally unconscious skill for him. But with the whole world watching, the pressure mounted, he started overthinking it, and it took him an agonizing 2 weeks to finally hit number 600. It is a perfect real-world example of the Yerkes-Dodson law in action.
So, we know we make mistakes. We know stress makes them a lot worse. But what do we actually do when we realize we've messed up? Let's take a look at the different strategies we use to try and get ourselves back on track.
Well, research shows we pretty much use one of three main strategies. The best one is systematic exploration. This is when you have a plan. You methodically go through the options one by one until you figure it out. A little less effective is good old trial and error, where you're just randomly clicking stuff, hoping you stumble on the answer. And then there's the least effective strategy of all, rigid exploration. And this is when you do the exact same failed action over and over and over again, somehow hoping for a different result.
So, any guesses which of these three strategies we fall back on when we're super stressed out? Yeah, you got it. Rigid exploration. When our performance is tanking because of high stress, our problem-solving ability just narrows. We get tunnel vision. We stop looking for other options, and we just keep pushing the same button that didn't work the first 10 times we pushed it. It's a really frustrating but deeply, deeply human reaction to being under pressure.
Okay, so we've looked at the problem from a bunch of different angles. We know that errors are just going to happen. We know that stress makes everything worse. So what's the solution? How do we build a better, more humane world? Well, it all comes down to this idea of designing for forgiveness.
I love this quote. It's so powerful. The best error message is no error message. The ultimate goal isn't just to write a friendlier pop-up after someone has already messed up. The real goal is to design a system that's so intuitive, so clear, and so forgiving that the error never even happens in the first place.
So how do we actually do that? Well, first off, we assume something will go wrong. We have to start from there. Second, if a task is really repetitive, people are going to go on autopilot, and they're going to make mistakes. So instead of making someone delete 25 files one by one, let them select all 25 and delete them in one go. And finally, the ultimate safety net, a powerful undo button. I'm not just talking about undoing the very last click, but being able to undo an entire sequence of actions. These principles shift the burden of being perfect from the user to the designer, which is right where it belongs. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. The next time you make a mistake, when you push on that door that says pull or you click the wrong button, just take a second before you blame yourself and instead ask, how could this have been designed better? Think about it. What's one error you made this week that was actually the system's fault? Once you start looking for them, I promise you are going to see them absolutely everywhere. Thanks so much for watching.